Hello. Now, before we begin this video, I need to have a short disclaimer. Ladykiller In A Bind is not the normal type of game I review. This game actually has harsh language, swearing, and sexual content, and a lot more. I actually couldn't shoot around the swearing for this video because it's in so many lines here. If this is not what you're looking for, feel free to check out another of my videos, but realize this is going to be a more mature video and topic. Now, there is no nudity in the video, but there is in the game, and now you are warned. With that said, hello horny gamers. Well, you are horny, right? Because you've stuck around. I'm King Link, and this is my review of Ladykiller In A Bind. Now, Ladykiller In A Bind is a visual novel that is a genre that's really based around the story. There's a lot of variety in the genre, though. There's everything from Ace Attorney to Danganronpa, but more often these stories tend to be, less interactive and more about the journey itself. Well, that's true, but Ladykiller In A Bind is a little more interactive than this genre usually is. Now, before we dive in further, consider subscribing to my channel. I'd absolutely appreciate it. Well, this is a more mature game. This isn't always the topic that I'll be covering, but I do strive to find interesting games, and man, this certainly is one. I chose this game at random, and, well, here we are. I'm becoming a little more familiar with the visual novel genre after having reviewed Eliza and most of the Danganronpa series. I do believe I'm covering the last game of that series before the end of the year, but overall, I think visual novels are worth a look. This one, well, let's get into it. Graphically, Ladykiller In A Bind looks really good. The characters have quite a few poses between them, and there's a very solid style to the graphics. Characters are beautiful, there's a lot of visual motion between the views, and in addition, the writing adds a lot of dimension to the game. Now, the art here is also really beautiful, and while it is a type more aimed at the type of game this is, erotica, there is a lot of interesting characters and people as well as their designs. At the same time, there's no voiceovers here. That's one of those things I feel that visual novels as a whole could improve upon. Hearing a voice as you play through a very long story makes the game feel even better. Having the ability to put a game on auto advance and just listen is great, and it's one of the things I liked about Eliza. Here, there's not an auto advance mode, but there's also no voice acting, so you're limited to just nice mood music, but it becomes a bit empty after 3 to 4 hours out of the 6 that I played. Now, we are dancing around this a bit, but Ladykiller In A Bind is a porn game. The author can call it an erotic romantic comedy, blah blah blah, but the fact is, your character is here to hook up with various girls. Also, you are playing a woman, so it's what's known as a Yuri game, or better known as a lesbian sexual fantasy game. Now, there's nothing wrong with this idea, though. But if you are a bit of a prude or you just want something tamer to look at, you can actually turn on a censored mode, as I'm going to show you on the screen. And what's even better is the censored version is all about Christmas. Christmas sweaters for everyone. I'm going to be honest, I actually laughed the first time I saw this, but I played half the game with this turned off. And then I turned it on just for a laugh, and I actually think it makes the game better, at least a bit funnier, as you're seeing on the screen. Personally though, I think the art for the uncensored version of the game is a bit... it's not exactly sexy. I don't know why, but I find the censored version to be a better choice than the slightly titillating pornographic images. But before we get to the story, well, let's talk gameplay, because visual novels are about the story, so we'll end there. The majority of this game is played by advancing through a story and making limited choices. The choices here are well designed though. As a visual novel, normally you're giving limited interactivity, but here the choices will appear over time in the game, and if you pause and think for a couple more dialogue screens, for instance, you might get a different or better choice, or your choices might be removed. Technically, you think by advancing without choosing a branch. Now, this sounds like a solid and unique mechanic, but at any time you can also roll back the dialogue and choose a different path. Interesting idea, but it encourages min-maxing, trying to find the best possible route to maximize your rewards. The ability to roll back lowers the tension of your choices. Now, what really hurts the system, though, is that every choice enumerates the result of your decisions, so you can choose just the best result out of 3 options, or focus on avoiding suspicions. But if these choices were just given blind and you received rewards at the end of the scene with how well you played that scene, it would have been a better system for the game. Now, much of this game is about avoiding suspicion. We'll talk more about this in the story section, but if you get 5 suspicion points while going undercover as your brother during the whole game, you're found out and you earn a game over. A problem with this is that at the beginning of the game, you really don't have a solid grasp of how your brother acts or what he does. Well, that's kind of the point of the game. As a twin, you really should know how he acts or what he'd do in most of these situations. Sometimes you get suspicion for not involving yourself in the drama, for instance. The good news, though, is that if you have to watch the same scene twice, you can actually fast forward through a scene and a majority of choices made in that scene. Ladykiller In A Bind allows you to choose from a selection of scenes each day, with you having to make 2 different choices from the list, and then at night you can actually choose from one of 2 sex scenes. Now the thing is, you're forced to choose one of these 2 scenes, and you're forced to make the earlier choices. If you don't want to sleep with one of the 2 girls, too bad. Now, I'm not against porn games, I'm not against sexuality. I actually like the beginning of Ladykiller In A Bind, but after 6 hours of playing it, I found Ladykiller In A Bind to be a touch boring. It's all sexuality, but after a sustained level of this for 6 hours, it really lacks nuance, which is where the story really should have came in. Now, as I alluded to, the story of Ladykiller In A Bind focuses on the sister of a smart, powerful, and pseudo-popular high school student who is then forced to pose as him. I've heard the original title of Ladykiller In A Bind was, "My twin brother made me cross-dress as him, and now I have to deal with a geeky stalker and a dom beauty who wants me in a bind." With 2 exclamation points, mind you. I haven't seen that name in the game, but it actually summarizes much of the story. At the beginning of the game, I actually was pulled into this story. The writing starts strong, the idea is well executed, and the main push of the game is to avoid being detected. Great strong start for the idea. The thing is, there are a number of characters in the story heavily involved with the brother, and they don't notice the switch. This actually includes his ex-girlfriend and other characters who have spent a lot of time with him. Also, a lot of characters will touch the main character either in the breast or crotch area and somehow not notice that there are additional or missing pieces. And when they do find out that the brother is a girl, they don't care. It's as if they assume that the brother was always female. We'll talk about that. But before we do, let's get to something else. I haven't been using character names so far in this review, and if you've been watching the gameplay, you'll notice odd names. Well, on screen, this is why. Every character is introduced to the player, and then the player can name them as they want. You can see what I've named the characters on the screen, but the default names aren't much better in most cases. However, I did find it funny to call the main brother and sister Dorcas Maximus and Dorcas Minora. Alright, but I do have a problem with some of these other names. The game, with no prodding from me, decides to call one character the Swimmer, and then gives her an alternate name of the Slut. Yes, we can talk about reappropriating the word slut and slut walks and stuff like that, but that character doesn't act like that name is appropriate or really wants to reclaim it. And because she is your ex, it feels more like slut-shaming her than her reclaiming that name personally. You do get a couple of real names by the end of the game, but the thing is there's no reason to hide these names. Why? In addition, without spoilers, I'm going to say that the end of the game kind of torpedoes the entire story. There's not even a hint when we're on the boat of what's going to happen, and suddenly the entire game shifts and nothing matters. Initially, there's an idea of getting boats and winning a social game from the beginning, but after you play the actual game, outside of achievements, there's not really a point to the social game. It was just something to occupy the player with for a majority of the game. I've also tried to play through this game a second time because there are different endings, of course, but I couldn't get into it. So much of the drive of the game is about that social game and the sex scenes, but once you know the ending, well, the social game is gone, and the other half, well, okay, this is porn. We can talk about erotica and whatnot, but the majority of this game is here to be sexual, and while the writing can be good at times, it just feels too overly sexual for too long, too sustained a time. Every encounter the player has with a different person feels like a step on a different sexual story, but each of these stories are done in a vacuum. You can be in the middle of sleeping with a random girl, and another story has the main character practically forced to kiss a second girl in front of the first girl, and none of this is ever brought up. Similarly, the main character can give hickeys to a second character, and it's not even noticed. Each of these stories is on their own, so there is a limit on what you can do with these stories. Now, this is true of a majority of the scenes in this game. It's all about pushing a sexual narrative. Except for one special guy, who I'm going to call Dude Bro. He's the main character's cousin, and this isn't a sexual relationship between them. Well, mostly not, and that's an issue. This is the final encounter between the two of them, and there's a moment between them. But the other side is that every conversation with Dude Bro is about objectifying women. Really? This is all Ladykiller can do: objectify women, kiss them, talk sexually about them, or with them. It's a bit limited in range as a character. Now, there are two different characters you can sleep with. These are called the Beauty and the Stalker. Now, everyone is a sexual conquest in this game, or an archetype. Anyways, each night you can choose between either of these two sex scenes and they give you some reward. I say can choose, but it's really have to choose. You have to have sex with someone every night. The thing is, there's just too many sex scenes, and these night scenes are quite long. Some of these scenes are just like 5 to 10 minutes of characters kissing, licking, touching, eating. You get the point, and that is of course after they have their short intros. If there were just 1 or 2 scenes like this, it would be fine, or 1 or 2 per character. But after playing a week's in the game time, or about 5 hours, you'll be tired of it. At least I was. Now, the initial writing of the game is good for me, but over time, well, there's a lot of memes here, and it gets bogged down. There are some funny exchanges. I'll try to show 2 here. What is a lesbian? And later, limit breaks. But this just doesn't fit with the rest of the story the game wants to tell. It's just someone writing something clever, but as part of a story. It just doesn't work for me. It's like Harry Potter suddenly stops and says, "Oh, there's a game, Final Fantasy, that has these awesome moves. Wait till you see my limit break." And then the rest of the Harry Potter movie ignores it. But it's clear that the writers are doing it because they think the audience likes this stuff. Memes. There's also a very serious scene at the end of the game, probably the most serious scene in the game, which was ruined by a dad joke, and there's no reason for it. At that moment in time, it'd be awkward to say it, and it's not what would come to anyone's mind. Now, the thing is, I feel like a lot of this is written by a guy, and I know the author is actually Christina Love, a woman, but rather than looking more into the emotions here, there's a bit that just feels like fetishizing lesbian relationships. I don't know, but the repetitive sexual encounters feel like there's a lack of emotional maturity with the story. This is because the only way many of these characters relate to the main character is through kissing or more sexual displays. Granted, that could be part of the main character's issues too, but it comes off as an issue more with the author and the writing than the characters themselves. A bigger issue I have with Ladykiller In A Bind is that a lot of characters have different kinks, and for instance, we have 2 choices at night: Beauty and Stalker. Beauty likes to dominate people and will dominate our main character. Stalker, on the other hand, likes to be teased, bullied, and dominated. It's a choice, but there's no way to know who's who without spending at least one night or going a decent way down most of their paths. Now, don't like either of these choices? Well, too bad. You have to either be dominated or dominate someone else. It's a major limitation of the system here. What if my character wanted to just kick back alone for a night, or just part of one day? That's not an option. Now get in there and have sex with someone, or have a sexy scene with someone. Also, you can skip sex scenes, but at that point, without the erotica, there's really not much here, so skipping the sex scene is an odd choice. Feel free to make that choice, of course, but, well, it's like having a hamburger with cheese, bacon, and a bun. You take the hamburger away, it's not a burger, is it? There's also a removed scene dealing with sexual humiliation, as well as potentially heterosexual experience, where the main character is possibly forced to do something. I'm going to admit something. I haven't played that scene out myself, and while it is available at some places online, I'm not that interested in it. I read a bit of it, I got it, just haven't played it. But the thing is, that's not a problem. It brings up an important point, though. The game makes a few motions towards consent at times with certain people and certain dialogue trees. And the problem is, so much more of the game has nothing to do with consent. Our main character bullies and teases Stalker, making her admit that she likes it. But if she actually didn't like it, and you replay the whole scene again where she feels pressured into saying it that she likes it, it's a pretty dark scene. In fact, consent as a whole is rarely achieved in this game, and if the game was more about getting consent from these people, whether it be written or another form for various sexual acts, that could actually resolve the issue. But instead, much of the game wants to hand-wave away the concerns of consent because fun, sexy time isn't about legally binding agreements about sex. Yet that's the problem. We're ignoring consent except when we choose not to. There's a line at the beginning of the game that tries to say this is fantasy and getting consent in real life is really, really important. But then shouldn't it be a fantasy all the time, not just when you forgot about getting consent? Another character takes a mouthful of alcohol and forces our main character to drink it. That's really questionable. You know what? It's not questionable. It's problematic. Let's just say that. Consent is only important to Ladykiller In A Bind when it wants you to think about it. Also, since this is a voting game in the background, the social game, much of your actions here are in pursuit of the votes. So there's a lot more nuance in this world than the game wants you to consider. Are you being forced to kiss a specific girl or guy because you want to, or because you want to vote? The game doesn't want to talk about that because, again, it's not sexy, and that might ruin the illusion, but for a game trying to talk about these topics, it really doesn't talk about them at all. Now, yes, this is a fantasy, but in the right light, it's a fantasy less about fun, sexy time and more about, well, we're going to have to say it, rape. And the removed scene in question does seem far more harsher than much of the rest of the game, at least what I have seen. But the majority of this game isn't innocent fun because they took out that one scene. A worse problem is the main character herself. If I dressed up as another person, initiated sexual acts while posing as another person, that would be highly illegal, probably classified as simply sexual assault. That's the only thing our main character does for the entire week. It's really problematic if you want to look at it that way. Now, as I thought about this game and discussed it with my wife, I started to see why I had this issue. I actually talked quite a bit about the game without mentioning the main character was a woman, as if that fixed something. And when I did tell her that, my wife made an important comment. It made me realize something. If our main character was a male instead of a female and did many of the same sexual acts, the story would not have been well received. My wife summed it up far better than I could. She's a brilliant woman. Instead of Ladykiller In A Bind, it could have simply been titled Trump Simulator. And she's not wrong about that. You know, rating Ladykiller In A Bind is hard. I have a lot of problematic thoughts about the entire story, and I think it's not intentional, but it's still there. But again, the game is supposed to be fun, sexy time and not meant to dive into these deeper and more important questions about consent or rules about sexual conduct. Yet, I can't ignore that these issues kept being brought up by my actions in the game. Ultimately, I admit I enjoyed my playthrough of the game, but hated the second attempt. I think Ladykiller In A Bind isn't a great game. It has a lot of flaws, but it also is a unique enough game for the first playthrough that it's worth it. And if at best the only thing that came from the game is a deeper thought about heady issues that we've talked about here, well, I can say I like that. I just wish I felt that this was the intentional endpoint of the game, rather than just how I interpreted the story and it was intended as more of a sexy fun time, like I've said. I ultimately will give Ladykiller In A Bind a 3 out of 5. You know, I think this game is one that most people could skip if they wanted to. But if you want to see something different and unique, or you really just love visual novels, Ladykiller In A Bind is interesting. Just take it with a huge grain of salt, and really, don't try to emulate anything you see here at all. That's Ladykiller In A Bind, and like I've said, absolute random choice, but also really unique. I'm going to try to keep finding games like this that aren't what people expect. So with that said, I will be back soon to summarize the Humble Monthly Bundle, and then I have 2 games I'm playing right now that are pretty good. I'll be back soon to talk about those as well. And if you've enjoyed this review, consider subscribing, as I've said. I won't be talking about games like this that often, but if someone was to suggest another one, hint hint, maybe I'd check it out. I do want to check out the KFC Dating Simulator, Danganronpa V3, and I've heard enough about Clannad that maybe that's something that I should check out. I'll be popping up my reviews of the original Danganronpa and Eliza, both really good visual novels for those who want to see something similar to this game. Until next time, I'm King Link, and thanks for watching.